Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Listen to Daddy. I am one of your hosts, Daddy Rob.
And I am the other host, Daddy Rod. And we're happy to have you join us today. And I am happy that you are joining us today because we have a really special topic that is very important that a lot of us don't like talking about, but it's still very necessary. And that is, we're talking about end of life planning. And it was very interesting because last year, when Rob and I were thinking about topics for 2025, and this one came up, at first I was just thinking, okay, it's important. We need to talk about wills, we need to talk about power of attorneys, we need to talk about dying, because many of us, as we get older, we become faced with our mortality. In the time between that discussion and this recording, my father passed away. In fact, January 12th is when he left this earth. And it has put a different perspective for me in terms of planning for life and excuse me, for the end of life. So I'm not quite sure where to begin, but I'm going to punt over to you, Daddy Rob, if there's any thoughts you have before I kind of launch into kind of the learning lessons this whole experience of my dad passing has had for me.
Well, first off, my heart's with you on the loss of your father, and I don't think it really matters what kind of father you have. It's still kind of a big impact for a man to lose the person who provided half their DNA, and
Yeah.
whether or not they had a good relationship or a bad relationship, losing a parent, you can go through a lot of stuff in processing that. And as I told you when you let me know that your father had passed, you're the first of the two of us, anyway, to have encountered that reality of what it is to lose your father. And as we age, most of us are probably going to lose our father before we pass. So it's and as I told you, I think the big quote I remember is that a man becomes a man after his father passes, because up until that time he walks in his shadow. And so it's like a time to claim your right as the top of that family chain. And I know it's complicated. I don't know how much of that you want to talk about, but I mean, is what should people think about in knowing that one day any parent they could lose?
Yeah, so two things. Well, one is an aside because Rob, that I'm actually a junior. My government name is Rodney McCoy Jr. So most of my life, I've been Rodney Jr., Rod Jr. Professionally, I've been Rodney McCoy Jr. And let me give a shout out to my mother, who, and I do want to talk about this a little later. She has embraced her identity as a widow. And she's been an inspiration because she has done so with just an amazing amount of grace. And just so happened 2 days ago was her birthday. And February 15th was her birthday. So, of course, I called Mama to wish her a happy birthday. And so when I talked to her, I refer to myself, of course, as Rod Jr. And she said, "You're no longer a junior." And I asked her about that at first because, I guess because even though he's not here, because he's here and he's here, I still thought of myself as junior. But she said, "No, he's not here anymore. You are no longer a junior." And I had to sit with that. And I think it ties into the first thing to your first question about what we should know about end of life when it comes to mourning a parent. And I assume the same might be for losing a spouse. End of life when it comes to other people. No matter how many people you have in your circle, in your close circle, who have gone through the experience before you, there is nothing that can prepare you for it. And actually, someone told me that. And when I started experiencing it, it was a great source of comfort for me because what it meant was, this is some new territory for me. This is some new stuff for me. And emotionally, there are times where, like even now, where I might feel choked up, where somebody might say something that'll be kind of like, whoa. Um, and it's okay to ride that roller coaster. And I would say that to anyone. who is mourning the loss, excuse me, of a parent, who is mourning the loss of a spouse. And God help us, the loss of a child. Um, you know, there's nothing that can prepare you for it. Whatever you think, whatever you feel, it is okay, and it's part of the process. And the other thing also is having people around you that you can really talk with stuff about it. The biggest source of support in the immediate days were my siblings, my brothers and my sister. And it was very interesting because our mother had always been on us to make sure that we keep our relationship together. Um, and I'll be honest with you, at first, I thought she was kind of biased because actually, for both my parents, they've had close ties to many of their siblings. So at first I was like, and I love my siblings. And I was like, at first I just thought, okay, there's a bias here because my father is for the most part close to his siblings. My mother remained close to her sisters. So I thought there was a bias. But when dad passed, my being there, and I'm not saying everyone should or needs to, because some of us don't have good relationships with family members, and that's okay too. But if you do have someone in your blood, as well as your what is the word we use, extended family or family of choice, that's the words we use as LGBTQ folk. Fuck Trump, I'm going to say LGBTQ. So even with all of that, having people you can talk to, that you can really be honest and open about what this means, is incredible. It's really incredible.
I'm glad you have that support. And there's no timetable for grief. There's no right way to do it. And if you think that you're not feeling enough or feeling too much, you're feeling exactly what you need to be feeling right now. And give yourself the grace to feel whatever it is. And like you said, even if you have a bad relationship with a parent, it can still be an emotional wallop. Even though you think, well, if anything happens to them, I'll be fine. There's this phenomenon where you still grieve in a way, but it's not necessarily the grief of losing that particular person, but leaving what could have been. Because a lot of people go through the hope that one day that relationship will turn around, and that day will never come now. And so there's a different kind of grief that you experience in that, but it's all valid and it all has to be felt. But I'm curious, like, what you learned, because what we originally talked about was this was going to be about preparing for end of life.
And I still want to talk about that because there was a lesson in that for me.
Yeah.
But before you ask me your question, I'm glad you said that, because me and my siblings, there are 5 of us total. Each of us had different relationships with our dads. Some of us were close to them. Some of us were not. Some of us had no relationship with them. And what I kind of thought would happen actually did happen. Regardless of our relationship, whatever it was, there was still some element of grief. So whether you're close to your parent, you're totally estranged from them, didn't even know who they were, or your relationship is some kind of complex mix of the two, there's always going to be some kind of grief. And I think we don't need to run from that. We can embrace that. We can be okay with that. No matter the type of grief, no matter the reason for the grief. And even for myself, out of the 5 of us, I was one of us who was closer to him. But even in grieving, there were times my dad was the most amazing man, and there were times my dad was incredibly mean. So for me, mourning and grieving has been trying to find that sweet spot where I can be honest about who he was, bad and good, still love him, and still feel all of the emotions.
And just to be clear, the last stage of grief, as they traditionally say, is acceptance. It doesn't mean that grief is over, because all throughout your life there may be reminders of it. But acceptance is not the same as forgiveness. So for those people who are going through a grieving process where they've been harmed by a parent, it is not necessary to forgive them for that harm. but there is still that process of having to accept that they are gone, and that you are left with whatever those feelings are. And I would suggest, if you've been grieving for what you think is too long, that you seek out help to get somebody to help you process through those emotions. Um, and thank you for sharing that additional information. And it's not my intention to rush through your feelings about losing your father, but I do know, like you said, particularly families that are entrenched in the grieving process, to kind of have to sort through the all legalities and the everything that's left behind by the person to kind of sort out.
Yes.
That can exacerbate that grief and cause people to not
Yes.
think clearly.
Yes.
So the more you can do before you pass to spare people that challenge, the better. So
Yes.
are you prepared to
Yes.
talk about anything that
Yes.
has
Yes.
reached the light of day as far as what we should be
Yes.
preparing for?
Yes. Thank you for saying that. That segues nicely into what we wanted to talk about, what the original intention of this was, and what was a learning lesson. So the bad news was, now here's the other thing. I would say the first thing I would like us being you, me, our respective partners, anyone watching this, is to not be afraid to at least initiate these conversations. Um, I think on some levels, my father was ready to have, which was a blessing. I do want to say that he was willing to talk about mortality. He was willing to talk about death. He was willing to talk about making that transition, especially as he realized his condition. He died of an illness, an autoimmune disorder that led to different complications. And so I think dying in and of itself was something he was willing to talk about, as is my mother. So that's a blessing. What my father was hesitant to talk about was the preparation for the passing. So, um, to my own credit, that this was something I would always ask him about. Are your affairs in order? Do you have your will? Do you have your power of attorney? Do you have your health proxy? Can I help you with that? And he would always deflect. Um, so the bad news was he would always say, "Yes, I have that under control. You don't have to worry. I'm asking my best friend, his best friend of nearly 4 decades. She has all of that. She's going to take care of all of that. We've got it. We're good. We're good, Junior." Um, Only to find out at his death that he had no will. His partner, and I say partner, she's a woman. And a lot of times when we say partner, we think same sex, but no. No. She said there was no will, there was no power of attorney, there was no health proxy. And that pissed me off because he wasn't honest with me about that. But what he did have, and this was the good thing, he had health policies, life insurance policies. He had two, one specifically for his burial and one for another beneficiary. And we'll leave it at that. And no, it wasn't me. Um, we're gonna let that go. We're gonna let that go. And that's going to be an offline conversation. But what he did have was life insurance policies, and that was such a blessing because we knew that the type of service he wanted, because he's a military veteran, he wanted a military service, and that provided the means for us to be able to provide that for him. That was such a load off of our minds.
Yeah, and that's
So
just one thing. Like you said, there are other things that he didn't manage, but it shows the importance of taking care of them. Just taking care of one thing alleviated at least a little stress. And I think it was, well, about 7 years into our marriage. My husband and I went and actually sat down with a lawyer to draw up a will, and that was something I was a little resistant to do because, I mean, I
so what
wasn't
did your
wasn't
resistance
thinking
come
that.
from?
It just, other things seem to be more important for our time, than to track down to, pay money to a lawyer to kind of draw all this up. But one of the things that I realized in the process was it wasn't just about who's getting your stuff, because as a gay man, I'm stereotypical in that I don't have children. I have pets, and that's been it. So there was nobody that I was thinking about that I wanted to leave anything to in my family. So it was like, well, when I die, and they can figure it out. But
Hmm.
the reality is that the will is more than just that. It's about um, like you can put in your end of life wishes as far as like what type of burial you want, any of that stuff to take that pressure off of whoever's planning that for you. I mean, if you don't give a damn about anybody who's going to be after you and has to deal with this stuff, I guess don't worry about it. But if you have any shred of care for your next of kin, because whether or not you have kids, they will identify your next of kin and they will be the ones who are responsible if you haven't named somebody to be responsible. And if you know want them to go through a lot of heartache and pain, fine. But your life, you've accumulated, you've spent this time on this earth having your identity, gathering your stuff, making your successes. It should be part of that responsibility of being a human being to say what you want that all to be for. And so my husband and I named charities in our will that we wanted money to go to, and we created somehow we're a corporation or something. I'm not really sure what the hell we are, but a trust, something that all of the money we make goes towards that. So it makes it a lot easier. The lawyer knows all this stuff. And it was worth the money just for that ease of being able to say, this is what I want, and having her type it all up, and we just signed it. And now we don't have to worry about it anymore.
So I'm glad you shared that, because now, as a result of my dad's passing, I'm now at the very beginning of my end of life information. And so what I want to tell people is, and especially those of us who are older, again, I'm 57 turning 58. For those of us who have lived through the AIDS, well, we're technically still in the AIDS era, but what's the word, protease inhibitor, from before 1996, when we were told we were not as a matter of fact, before the ADA, no, excuse me, before the Affordable Care Act, pre Obamacare, we were told because we had HIV, we were discouraged from getting health insurance because it would be exorbitantly expensive. But thanks to the ACA, and again, another swipe at people who voted for Trump and against their own interests, who wants to take away those very things. But y'all did what y'all did. But the good news is there is still affordable life insurance policies as well as health insurance policies for people with pre-existing conditions like myself, heart disease and HIV. So I am now there. And actually, speaking of older folks, because I am an AARP member, they have offered, and I want to see if the offer is still on the table. They have offered me some life insurance policies that I actually do want to take care of. And the other thing it's making me think of is beneficiaries. I don't have children of my own, but I do have nieces and nephews. There are some of my nieces and nephews that I am close to. In fact, there is something, and this touches on the whole thing of wills. Even if you don't have a large amount of things, if you have anything that and I mean anything. For example, I have some jewelry I want one of my nephews to have, because we both share the same birth month. That would go in the will. If there's particular clothing, and people think I'm taking this for granted, but as a lawyer shared with me, if you have anything, books, clothing, property, what have you, any material thing that you want specifically designated for a person and or an organization, a will definitely make sure that that is spelled out. And between me and you, if you have anything written on behalf of the person who is deceased, because here is the thing, and I think especially for those of us who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, especially if we lived our lives out loud, and there have always been, and there may be a relative, a family member who's never been comfortable, there may be, and I have experienced this in my own family, there may be resistance to what your final wishes are for whatever reason. Having things written is a good way to assure and ensure that your wishes are recognized. Because if I did not have my cousin's wishes And as much as I love my aunt, and I still do, initially she was resistant. But when you're like to following and honoring my cousin's wishes, but because they were written down and I had what he wanted in writing, she knew she couldn't mess with me. She called a family meeting and was surprised to see how, again, my mother, I think one of my other aunts, and her best friend, as well as me, were saying, we need to honor his wishes.
Yeah, and I think if anybody has gotten repeated gifts from family members where you're like, what the hell were they thinking? You know that not every family member knows what you like or what you want. They'll just know what they want, and everybody thinks they know you, and they may not necessarily know you.
Right.
And one of the things he said kind of reminded me of a friend who was talking about the fact that uh, he has told a friend of his, if anything ever happens to him, this friend has a key to his house always, but said, I need you to come into my house and remove everything, all the pornography, all the BDSM stuff, get, not that I care. I mean, I don't care if my family sees it. They know enough about me, but there are some people that's an important thing that they want to kind of keep that separate even after death from who they are in their parents' eyes, or their family's eyes. So you might want to think about that when you're planning.
And I'm glad you said that because, and it's making me think. I do have things from toys to, this is the other thing, and pay attention, those of us you were watching who are part of the leather and kink communities. We have the leather archives, we have the Carter Johnson Library, we have organizations. Make sure, either when you are very ill and you think that this might be the end, and or as part of your will, make sure you designate who you want the porn to go to, who you want your leather things to go to. Because more than not, things have ended up in the trash heap. Things have ended up on Etsy. Things have ended up in places that if we knew this is where our leather things would go, our kinky things, our toys would go, our porn would go, you know, that has to be spelled out too. That has to be protected as well. And people might laugh and say, ha ha, hee hee. But if you've ever had the experience of trying to clean out
Mm.
a loved one's stash before the family, or if it's the family, it's like, what do we do with this? And even in the best case scenario, not knowing what to do with it, it may wind up literally in the trash heap.
Yeah, and vanilla people don't normally think of things like that, and that's not something your lawyer is going to bring up either. It's like, so
Right.
have you thought about what you want to do with your porn? So just, yeah, like I said, anything that's of value to you, anything that you feel you want to continue after you, don't assume other people are going to know what you want. It's impossible to read anybody else's mind or to know the complexity of the things that they have collected over their lives.
Yeah. I was blessed that one of my brothers and I, well, first of all five of us talked with each other and said, is there anything you want from his apartment? And his partner, God bless her, she was like, come to the apartment, take what you need. And I was able to get some things that I wanted, that I treasure. One of them I wound up giving to one of my brothers, and he got some things as well. So you'd be surprised, what people would want, what things you think may not be valuable that are valuable to people. And for me, this conversation brings up two things. One, the whole thing around cost. You talked about having a lawyer, and for some of us, having access to a lawyer is not an issue in terms of end of life planning. What I would encourage, if money is an issue, there are organizations, and what I would say is ask around. Sometimes there are county and state organizations that can provide low to no cost assistance in terms of end of life planning. There may be community centers that offer that as well. Ask around. If cost is an issue, ask around. The other thing is, and it's very interesting that we are talking about this, because I think what often gets in the way is that we don't like talking about death. Death is not, in spite of the fact that pastor after pastor, preacher after preacher, in sermons, in whatever, have said, and again, as a Christian, I say this, have talked about, we all have to take that walk. We all have to leave this earth at some point. And even my mother, not just as a Christian or as a chaplain, but also as a nurse, she has said to me, death is a part of life. So I think that, having that kind of upbringing, as I mentioned, my dad, as he got closer to his time, was more open about talking about dying. My mother, again, being a nurse, has talked about the reality of that as well. So I think for me, it's been helpful. That's why it was easy for me to at least ask my dad, hey, we can talk about death, and that's fine. Can we at least talk about the process of preparing? It is hard to have those conversations if we have a hard time talking about death.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I want to put that to you because as a therapist, I'm sure you've had to have, at least professionally, these conversations as well. And what's your perspective in terms of helping to facilitate those discussions?
Yeah, before I get into that, I just wanted to tack on to when you're talking about people not knowing what you have that's a value
Yeah.
that you feel is a value. They also don't know what's not valuable, and I would just encourage anyone from at least once a year to go through wherever papers you have stored and make sure that they're all still relevant. Anything that you have in your home when you die has to go somewhere. So so people have to pour through everything to get to whatever documents are worth keeping. If you already know you've got stuff that you've been holding on to that doesn't mean anything anymore, certificates from past jobs and careers you don't no longer have, or if you save your stuff for taxes, throw the stuff away that's too old for that. Whatever it is, and crap. Like Maria Kondo, if it doesn't bring joy, get rid of it. I wouldn't go to that degree, but whatever it is that you have in your possession, just realize someday somebody's going to have to go through and decide whether or not to keep it or get rid of it.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up because what also was helpful was, again, my dad's partner, she had a specific folder that had the pertinent end of life stuff. So that's another thing. Have a designated folder that has your will, your copy of the will, your copy of the power of attorney, the health proxy. And in case we're saying some things that folks may not understand, the will is just that. What are your wishes for your material things, or whatever else, intellectual property, what have you? What do you want done? What are your wishes? That's what a will establishes. A health proxy gives power specific around medical issues to someone. If you're incapable, incapacitated to make your own health decisions, health proxy designates someone to do that for you. Power of attorney, not just in medical issues, but in all legal issues. If you're not able to do that yourself, who do you designate? Who has that right to do that? In some cases, it might be the next of kin, it might be a spouse. That might be, depending on the state, that might be by law, that may be like where it might automatically fall to someone. But if there's someone who you have in mind who may not fit those categories, a power of attorney allows that person to be that designee. There are some things around living trusts that I don't know. I don't know, Rob, if you can talk to that. But these are things to be looked at in addition to life insurance policies.
Yeah, I don't know enough to give advice about it, so it's always a good idea to consult a professional. But
and that can be part two.
Yeah, but and it's also decide what you want as far as do not resuscitate, what you want as far as artificial means of staying alive. If decide whatever it is, just decide and have a document that says that, because otherwise you are expecting somebody else in the most difficult point of one of the most difficult points of their lives, losing you, to decide how to proceed with that. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, an unfair burden to put on somebody you love. If you can't decide for yourself, how are you going to expect somebody else to make that decision for you? So spare them that. Yeah. But you would ask about talking to clients about death and dying. I mean, I would take this from two angles. One's if you thinking about the loss of somebody in your life, and the other one about thinking about your passing, your eventual passing. And if it's somebody else in your life, the thing I keep coming back to is we are forever changed. I'm thinking Wicked just came out. Because I knew you, I've been changed for good. That is true. I mean, no matter what the interaction is, it's like two objects meet, they're going to affect the trajectory of each other in some way or another. So your life is forever changed by every person who's come into your life. And the more they've been in your life, the more of an impact they've had on that. So you carry on some level that person. Your identity, something about your life is impacted by that person. You may never know as far as it has tunneled its way into your life, but they're there. So you are part of the person you've lost legacy. So what is it about them that you valued and that you can be a representative of on this earth, since they can no longer do that, and be a living testament to the love you had for that person or the living testament to the resilience you showed by dealing with that person. Whatever it is, own that that part of them that you carry is a part that you want to carry. Mm-hmm. As far as the thought of your own life ending, the question I've asked a few clients is, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want the people who are left behind to remember about you? And how are they going to remember that? How do you demonstrate that in your life? Because a lot of people say, I want to be remembered as a good person. Okay, so what is it that you're doing or with those people or around those people that they see you being a good person? How do you define being a good person? And that kind of helps to put things into perspective. Because I think a lot of people don't want to think about death because on some level, they think they should be doing more. It's like that joke about Jesus is coming, look busy. What are you doing now that's giving your life meaning? Because we do as human beings tend to coast a lot. I mean, we don't on a daily basis going, I'm going to impact the world. Well, we may, but to a certain degree, we have these periods of time where we're just kind of enjoying what it is to be alive. But when we think about death, then we go, oh God, what have I contributed? What has my time on this planet been for? So think about that. What do you want it to be for? And then do the work to make it so. Don't just hope that it's going to turn out that way. If you want to be somebody who has helped the planet be a little greener, plant some trees. Whatever it is that you want to do to contribute to that legacy, and think about it in that regard. Your life. There's that thing about on tombstones they have the date when the person's born and the date when the person dies, and in the middle is that dash. That dash is the most important part.
Right.
So and what is your dash worth?
And I'm glad you said that. Another thing to think about is, how do you want your service to be? For example, I do not want to be interred. I don't want to be buried in the ground. I don't want a headstone because my family, honestly, we tend not to visit headstones. We don't visit people's graves.
A lot of people don't.
With my father passing, that might change. And even if I do it, I'll probably only do it once. But yeah, we don't. So that, plus the fact that, to borrow a phrase from the Golden Girls, the truth of the matter is a lot of us are bereaved on a budget. So that is the other thing for me. So all of this to say, I do not want a burial. I don't want an internment. I want to be cremated. There is also the importance of having that in your will as part of your wishes as well, because those of us who come from religious families, there are some, I'll say, Christians who believe that it is wrong to be cremated, which makes no sense to me. And I always say the scripture, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So what's the problem? But there are some people who are anti-cremation. And one of the things that would piss me off is if I say I want to be cremated, and at the end of the day, people are scrambling to bury me somewhere. It's like, no.
Yeah, our lawyer was asking us how we wanted to be interred. And I was like, I definitely don't want a funeral. I don't want any of that. It's like, the greener the better. Just wrap me in a burlap bag and throw me in the forest. And she clued us into, I guess there's this organization that puts the deceased in coral reefs. So we chose that. Just help. We go back to the ocean and be put there where fish can survive off this. Then that sounded like a wonderful compromise.
Right. And that's the importance also of knowing how you want to go, because ecologically, when you're dealing with a rotting corpse, there are some options, and other than internment, and there may be some non-options. So and that's why it's important to not only think about and then be able to explore how can this be done. That's
Yeah, and I don't recommend being turned into with a diamond. I mean, there's something where
I
they
have
turned.
heard that, and
Yeah,
I'm kind of like, yeah, no.
yeah. I'm a little challenged by people who have asked to be cremated and then in their will stipulate who gets the urn, because it's like why you got to impose on somebody. Like if somebody has said I would love to have your remains, great. But like Aunt Barbara, all of a sudden FedEx shows up with an urn with your ashes in it, and she's trying to remember who you are. That's
Have you have you heard of that happening, where the relative who did not ask for the ashes got them?
Oh God, yes, 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 yes.
Whoa,
Yeah.
whoa!
And then they don't know what to do with them.
Ashes. So again, talking about these things, putting them in writing. Also, what's important is who handles. At this point in my life, I have a partner, and I'm very close to my sister. Those are the two people I want to handle, like whatever my wishes are. The irony is, again, my father had wanted his best friend. He didn't want me to handle his last wishes. The irony, though, is that initially, to get things started, I did have to step in as the next of kin to at least get the ball started before his best friend could come in and finish the rest. But again, when you know what a person's wishes are and you know who they want to have handle whatever the wishes are, who's the beneficiary, who gets, if there's some cash and carry, I love that phrase from Whoopi Goldberg from one of her skits. If there is some cash and carry, who gets what? Who handles what? Those are important things as well. There are things Damon knows about me that the family does not know. Catherine, my sister, Catherine and I have a relationship. There are things she knows about me that the family does not. She knows more. She and my brother John probably know the most about me. There are reasons why I would want them to represent the family and have them involved or have her involved. And again, Damon is my baby. That's my partner. I want him to make sure that there are things that are in place that I know he would take care of. So, and again, these are conversations to be had. This is part of the planning.
Oh yeah, and talk to the person who you're going to have be executor.
Yes.
Get their permission first. Don't just slap their name on something, because that's a big responsibility for somebody to take on. And you can name a primary and a backup in your will. You can go down the list as far as you want if you're not sure they're going to be still alive when you're gone. So so have those conversations with anybody. Anybody's name that goes into your will might be a good idea to give them a heads up that it's in there.
Yes, exactly. We're talking also about end of life, and for most people, that's like what happens upon my death or our death. It also dawned on me, not quite the end of life, but as we approach the end of life, there needs to be planning too. For example, retirement. For those of us who want to retire, because not all of us want to retire, by the way, but for those of us who do, what does the retirement look like? What do finances look like? Where are we going to live if we have a house? And if I lose a spouse, or my health, dramatically or eventually declines, can I still stay in the house? Do I need in-home care? Do I need to downsize, go from a house to a condo or even an apartment? Where is the money going to come from? And especially with the current administration wanting to destroy things that many of us are relying on, like Social Security, like Medicare, like health insurance, publicly funded, things like that. These are questions we need to really start asking, especially those of us who are part of the LGBTQ community who do not have children.
Yeah.
Especially those of us who do not have children. Because I think for a lot of our heterosexual counterparts, there's always that assumption that because I have children, I have a built-in network, I have a built-in support system. And that is not always the case. Even if you
Right.
have kids, that may
Yes,
not
exactly.
be the case. So, and as I experienced with my dad, even if you have kids, you may not want the kids to be part of those final plans for whatever reason. For whatever reason. So, but these are also before we die. These are also conversations, and I know Damon and I have them also. I,
Oh, and if you don't want a church service, you got to say that as well,
yes,
because if your family is religious and they want one and you don't, whatever you have in your will, it takes priority over whatever the family wants.
exactly. And for those of us who, because when you said that, I thought, I don't know. Again, I'm a church boy. I'm a church. Again, altar boy for 8 years growing up. Part of the ministry. Was a deacon for so many years in the church movement I was part of. So the idea of being in church does not whatchamacallit, doesn't turn me off. However, dot dot dot. I'm not part of a church right now. The other thing is I would want someone progressive, who does not, like think of LGBTQ folks as sinners, going to hell, an abomination. Because if you bring that shit up in my service, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna wreck that service. Or I may designate a few people to be like, hey, you have my permission to F stuff up. So, yeah. Yeah, so these are things and I haven't even thought about. My baby has. He's made it real clear what he wants. I have not thought that far in terms of all I know is I don't want to be I want to be cremated. I don't want to be buried. And these are things to think about. What does
Yes.
that service look like?
Something else is, what do you want your obituary to look like? And I know
Yes.
that this is kind of morbid, but yet,
No, it's
listing,
not morbid.
having a paper, having everything together in a packet, your end of life stuff is great. And one of the papers should be what you view as your life accomplishments, the things you would like. If somebody's writing the obituary, you can write it yourself. What all those things that you've done in your life that you want to be remembered for, and where you want that posted. What if there's
Yes.
like if you want it in the leather
Yes.
journal, if you wherever you want that, so that because people don't automatically know you've died and ask for that information. If you send it to them, generally most places you want to publish it in will publish it. So think about that. Who this again tapping into your legacy and what were you saying about retirement earlier? Just whether or not you want to retire, it's still a good idea to take time to talk to a financial advisor. If you bank with an institution, if you contact the bank, most of them have a financial advisor there, and it doesn't matter how much money you have. It still is worth having that conversation about how do I
Yes.
plan for the end of my life, because it's good to know what you can afford to be in, and if there's anything you can do now to help prepare for that in a
Right.
way that you're going to be comfortable.
Right. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned the obituary because I had to write my father's obituary. I wound up having to do that. And again, his wishes were other people to do it, and then I thought other people were going to step in. The day before it was due, I was talking with like family members, and we all realized no one had written it, and he didn't have a template. So basically, I stepped up to say, "I'll take the lead." Had long talks with my mother, had long talks with my aunt, my father's sister about it, and also talked with one of my brothers, like to just make sure there were some missing pieces. It turned out to be a really good experience to have my mother, to have my aunt, to have my brother walk down memory lane with me. Um, so it turned out to be a beautiful experience. But initially it was stressful because again, it was last minute. We didn't have anything. And it's like, what do I say? What do I say? Um, and I will also say there's a power in writing the obituary because then you really do get to craft the memory of the person. And I'm grateful my mother, my aunt, and my brother were able to fill in some other pieces that I probably would have forgotten. but there were some pieces that I deliberately highlighted, like about the 5 amazing and wonderful children that our parents had. But again, you're right to have that obituary, to have that ready. And also to be clear, because there was a poem my mother wanted included that unfortunately I think the funeral home didn't scroll all the way down in the documents, so they forgot. Be really clear what you want. So I'm already thinking ahead of time. That poem my mother wanted for my father's obituary will go to hers because this is a poem that she liked. So
yeah, and if you are writing your own obituary, you know who's writing it. I'm one of those people who recommends, unless you want your estate inundated with flowers, to say something like, in lieu of flowers, please send donations to wherever it is that you want to go, because people want to express their grief in some way, and if they know you have a final wish that they make a contribution to something, they may be more likely to do so. But I think the thing that we all have to remember in all of this is, and this may be a hard pill to swallow, but we are one day all going to die.
Yes.
There's no escaping it.
Exactly.
And it doesn't prolong your life to not think about it. It doesn't make your life better to not think about it.
Yeah.
In fact, it probably adds some more value to your life if you do think about the fact that you are not a being that's going to be around for eternity. We have a short stay on this planet, and we try to make the most of it we can. And then at the end, we pass that on to somebody else, and so, it's the space will be taken.
Yeah.
But the space that you make in other people's hearts will be there for as long as they are. So it's more about the connections we make with one another and the life that we build while we're here. But part of that is taking responsibility for what it is you're leaving behind. And, we all leave behind a lot of junk. And, like I said, somebody's going to have to deal with it. You might as well put on your big boy panties and go out there and make those plans and set yourself up for a situation where those who are left behind, all they can do is process through their feelings about it and remember the good times they had with you, instead of dealing with all that other crap that you didn't have time for.
Yeah. And Rob, I really can't think of anything else to say after that. So I think for this installment of Listen to Daddy, I think that's a beautiful place to wrap up for now. And again, we will have to do a part 2 with a professional who can tell us more about the actual preparation.
Yeah.
But I really like this first discussion about like what it means for us. So again, with that, I want to say thank you for agreeing to it and for letting me share, like how personal this has now become for me. And with that, I'm Daddy Rod.
And I'm Daddy Rob.
And as always,
listen to Daddy.
We're going to get it right one day.
We are. It's
wait a minute. How about we don't? That's
our legacy.
Our signature.
Yeah. We're not perfect. We're just perfect for you.
Exactly.